It started as a normal Tuesday morning in Atlanta. Steve Harvey, the legendary host of The Steve Harvey Show, was sipping on his signature coffee, extra strong, 2 sugars, no cream. His staff bustled about the studio, prepping for what was supposed to be a light-hearted segment featuring a new comedian from Chicago and a feel-good story about a retired teacher starting a cupcake business. But then his assistant, Marla, stepped into his dressing room with a curious expression. "Steve," she said hesitantly, "we just got a call from the White House." Steve turned in his chair, raising an eyebrow. "The actual White House?" Marla nodded. "Yeah. Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt personally requested to be on the show." Now, Steve wasn't exactly a stranger to big guests. Presidents, athletes, and celebrities had graced his stage. But something about this felt different. "What's the occasion?" he asked. She said she wants to deliver a personal message. "Live? No scripts?" Steve leaned back, thoughtful. Under the Trump administration, Karoline Leavitt had risen to become one of the most unshakable voices in American politics. Young, fierce, articulate, and unapologetically conservative, she'd faced more media battles than most people 3 times her age. And now she wanted to come on his show? "Book her," Steve finally said. "Let's see what she's about." 2 days later, the buzz around the studio was electric. Secret Service agents were already sweeping the halls. Steve, still curious but unbothered, went over the general rundown. The segment was labeled A Heartfelt Message to America. The producers weren't given many details, only that Karoline would speak for 5 minutes uninterrupted and that Steve would be given something afterward. When she finally walked on stage, the audience stood up, not just out of respect, but surprise. Karoline looked nothing like the firebrand often portrayed on cable news. She was elegant, composed, and carried herself with a maturity that betrayed her age. Steve greeted her with his signature smile and a warm handshake. "Karoline Leavitt," he began, "now this is a surprise. You asked to be here personally. The floor's yours." She nodded, looked at the camera, and took a deep breath. "Thank you, Steve. And thank you, America, for allowing me into your homes. I didn't come here today as the White House press secretary. I came here as a daughter, as a granddaughter, and as someone who has watched this country go through immense pain and division. But also as someone who still believes deeply in redemption, grace, and healing." The audience grew silent. Even Steve sat back, struck by the tone of her voice. "I've followed your career, Steve. From Showtime at the Apollo to Family Feud to the inspiring things you've done for young men through your mentoring program. I've watched how you took pain and turned it into purpose. And there's something I want to say to you from the bottom of my heart." The audience leaned in. Karoline turned to Steve and her voice cracked slightly. "You once said your setback is just a setup for your comeback. That line, that saved my father's life." Steve's eyes widened and a hush fell over the room. "He was in a dark place, Steve. My father, once a decorated factory supervisor, lost everything during the economic downturn. He felt forgotten by the world. He didn't think anyone was fighting for people like him. One night, he was at his lowest, sitting alone in our garage. But he heard your voice coming from the living room TV. That segment about not giving up, that God's plan doesn't end in defeat, it changed everything for him." She paused, fighting emotion. "My dad walked back inside that night. He hugged my mother for the first time in weeks. And he said, 'Steve Harvey told me I've still got purpose.' That moment, Steve, was a turning point for our entire family." Steve stared at her, visibly moved, lips parted, his eyes already moist. "And today," she continued, "as I stand on this platform as Press Secretary of the United States, working in an administration that promises second chances and prosperity, I wanted you to know you helped raise me. Without even knowing it." The audience gasped. Steve's hands went to his face as his body trembled. Karoline reached into her folder and handed Steve a sealed letter. "This is from my dad. He wanted to thank you personally." Steve took the letter with trembling fingers. The studio remained eerily silent. No music, no applause, just the heavy emotion hanging in the air as Steve Harvey held the sealed letter from Karoline Leavitt's father in his hands. His eyes scanned the envelope, trembling slightly as he turned it over. The camera zoomed in as he carefully opened it and began to read silently. Karoline took a seat beside him, her hands folded in her lap. The audience watched, holding their breath. Steve's lips moved slowly as he read the handwritten note. A tear rolled down his cheek, and he paused halfway through, looking up at the ceiling, trying to collect himself. His voice cracked as he finally read it aloud. "Mr. Harvey, you don't know me, but you saved me. Years ago, I lost my job at a plant in Manchester, New Hampshire. I lost my pride, my purpose, and almost my life. But one night, while staring at the garage walls, I heard your voice on TV saying, 'God's not done with you yet.' That message felt like it was from heaven. I came back inside and I cried in my wife's arms for the first time since our wedding day. I got help. I got sober. And I got back up. My daughter saw that. She believed in this country again. She went into public service. Now she's standing next to you. Thank you, sir, for giving me the strength to be a father again. Thomas Leavitt. Steve couldn't hold back anymore. He wept. These weren't just camera tears, the kind showbiz people cry for ratings. These were real. Deep. Years in the making tears. The kind that come when a man who's given so much to the world suddenly realizes just how far his voice has reached. He looked over at Karoline, eyes full of emotion. You didn't have to do this, he whispered. I did, Karoline replied softly. Because too often, we forget to say thank you. And people like you, Steve, people who've poured into millions of lives, don't always see the ripple effect. My family is one of those ripples. The audience erupted into a spontaneous standing ovation. Some were clapping. Some were crying. Even a few of the cameramen, hardened by years in the business, had to wipe their eyes. Steve stood up and embraced Karoline. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, he said, pulling back with a smile. You're one of the most decent people I've ever sat next to. Karoline nodded, clearly emotional herself. Thank you. That means everything. After the break, Steve tried to move into the next segment, but it was obvious the moment had shifted the entire energy in the room. He tossed the cards aside. You know what, he said, looking at the crowd. We're not doing the next bit. Not today. The audience laughed and applauded. I've been in this business a long time, Steve said, walking center stage. And you all know I love making people laugh. But sometimes something bigger walks in the room. Today, it walked in wearing a red dress and told me I mattered. That I made a difference. And Lord, I needed to hear that. Karoline smiled humbly from her seat. Steve turned back toward the camera. To all the folks watching at home, Republican, Democrat, black, white, rich, poor, don't wait to tell someone thank you. Don't wait to give flowers when someone's gone. This moment right here? This is what America needs more of. The applause was thunderous. Backstage, producers scrambled to figure out how to salvage the rest of the taping. But Steve didn't care. Something sacred had happened. And for the first time in a long time, the show wasn't about ratings. It was about truth, humanity, healing. Clips of the emotional exchange between Steve Harvey and Karoline Leavitt went viral within hours. The hashtag Steve and Karoline began trending across all social media platforms. TikTokers shared the moment Steve read the heartfelt letter, while Twitter lit up with reactions from across the political spectrum. I didn't think I'd be crying watching Steve Harvey today. But wow, that's what unity looks like. Karoline Leavitt showed a different kind of strength today. Powerful. Forget politics for a second. That was a moment between two human beings. Respect. The next morning, major news networks couldn't ignore it. CNN, Fox News, Newsmax, MSNBC, they all aired the clip. Commentators debated the impact of such a public display of emotion, especially from someone like Steve, who was often seen as a source of laughter and strength. But the overwhelming tone was one of admiration and reflection. Inside the White House, President Donald Trump himself watched the moment unfold during his morning media briefing. Sitting at the resolute desk, he shook his head with a smile. That girl has a gift, he said, glancing over at his chief of staff. We hired her to talk policy, and she's uniting the country. That's what I'm talking about. He later tweeted. Beautiful moment on its Steve Harvey TV with our amazing press secretary Karoline Leavitt. A true patriot with a heart. Even made Steve cry, tough guy. Proud of you, Karoline, United States. Back in Atlanta, Steve spent the evening sitting quietly in his home, the letter from Thomas Leavitt resting on his coffee table. His wife, Marjorie, placed a hand on his shoulder. You okay, baby? He nodded slowly. Yeah, but it hit me. Real hard. Marjorie sat down beside him. You always say you hope to make an impact. Now you know you have. Steve chuckled through a sniffle. You know what got me the most? It wasn't just about him. It was his daughter. She saw him rise again. And it pushed her to rise, too. That's legacy right there. The next morning, Steve decided to go unscripted on his radio show, The Steve Harvey Morning Show. As millions tuned in across the nation, they heard a quieter, more reflective Steve. Y'all, let me talk to you today, he began. Something happened this week that I'll never forget. He recounted the story for his listeners, how Karoline Leavitt had surprised him, how her father's letter broke him open, and how deeply it affected him. I've met presidents. I've made folks laugh till they cried. But this was different. That young lady reminded me what purpose really means. Calls flooded the station. One by one, Americans, black, white, young, old, called in to share how Steve had touched their lives. One trucker from Kentucky broke down thanking Steve for a motivational video that stopped him from giving up. A single mom from Detroit said she'd played his stand-up routine during chemo sessions just to laugh through the pain. A teenager in Mississippi said Steve's morning devotions gave him hope after his father's death. Steve listened, quietly taking it all in. By the end of the hour, he simply said, "Lord, I don't know what I did to deserve this life, but thank you. Thank you for the pain. Thank you for the laughter. And thank you for sending that girl into my studio." Meanwhile, Karoline sat in her office at the White House watching the entire show replay online. She wiped her eyes and smiled. "Dad," she said on the phone that night, "I think we started something." Her father, his voice cracking with emotion, replied, "Sweetheart, you didn't just start something. You reminded the whole country what it means to be human again." As the dust settled from the viral moment, something unexpected began happening across the country. Churches, community centers, schools, even some major companies started organizing gratitude gatherings. Inspired by the emotional moment between Steve Harvey and Karoline Leavitt. From Baton Rouge to Boise, people gathered in small circles, sharing letters they had written to mentors, parents, teachers, coaches, people who had lifted them up in hard times. The movement became known unofficially as the Leavitt Letter Challenge. The idea was simple: write a letter to someone who impacted your life and, if you can, tell them face to face. A nurse in Cleveland brought one to the doctor who helped her fight through addiction. A soldier overseas sent one home to a teacher who pushed him to believe in himself. Even some politicians joined in, with members of Congress reading letters aloud during floor sessions in a rare display of bipartisan humanity. And Steve? He launched a full segment on his show titled Legacy Letters, inviting people each week to share their own letters and reunite with those who helped shape their lives. The first week, a firefighter from New York was reunited with the retired Army sergeant who pulled him out of a collapsed building after September 11th. Steve introduced the segment with a genuine smile. "I didn't know one letter could start a fire of love like this, but baby, we're just getting started." Back at the White House, Karoline Leavitt was being asked for interviews left and right. News anchors from every corner of the spectrum wanted to know what inspired her to bring that letter on Steve's show. Her response was always the same. "I wasn't trying to go viral. I was just trying to say thank you." One interview, however, stood out. She sat down with 60 Minutes for a rare personal profile. The interviewer, with a calm and curious tone, asked, "Karoline, there's a lot of criticism in politics. You work for one of the most controversial presidents in history. Yet, for a moment, all of that vanished. How did it feel?" Karoline paused, then answered honestly. "It reminded me that before we're political, we're people. And people are broken. People are healing. My dad's journey is proof of that." Steve Harvey gave him light when he was in the dark. It would have been wrong not to acknowledge that, especially when I had the platform to do it. The ratings for that 60 Minutes episode shattered records. But not everyone was celebrating. On certain political shows and fringe blogs, some critics accused Karoline of using the moment for political gain, claiming it was a strategic PR stunt. Steve Harvey had a clear response to that, live on his radio show. "Listen here. That woman didn't need to gain nothing. She's already in the White House. You think she brought that letter to me to climb higher? No, man. She did it 'cause she's got heart. You don't fake tears like that. Not in my studio." The next morning, Steve got a hand-delivered letter at his desk, this time from the First Lady, Melania Trump. "Dear Steve, your grace and authenticity moved us all. Thank you for being the kind of man who listens with his heart. Sincerely, Melania Trump." Steve smiled as he read it, then looked at his staff. "I guess the First Lady's watching now." The producer laughed. "You might be on the Trump Christmas card list, Steve." He chuckled. "If it means more people are saying thank you to each other, I'll take it." But what no one knew was that another moment, just as powerful, was around the corner. A surprise visit that would leave both Steve and Karoline stunned, and America once again watching with full hearts. It had been 3 weeks since the original broadcast. Steve Harvey's studio had returned to its normal rhythm, well, as normal as it could be, with the country still buzzing from the emotional firestorm Karoline Leavitt had sparked. Then, one Friday afternoon, Steve was called to a special meeting before his taping. His assistant tried not to smirk. "Boss, we've got a guest." "A guest?" Steve raised an eyebrow. "What kind of guest?" "The kind that rides with Secret Service." Steve blinked. As he walked to the backstage lounge, he saw them, 2 sharply dressed Secret Service agents, posted up like statues. And then, stepping from a sleek black SUV, came none other than President Donald J. Trump, followed by Karoline Leavitt. Steve froze. The president grinned and extended a hand. Steve Harvey. I had to meet the man who made America cry. You're doing a great job. Steve, ever the gentleman, shook it firmly. Well, Mr. President, that's a surprise. Trump chuckled. Karoline told me the full story and I had to say thank you in person. What you two did, what you stirred in this country, that wasn't about ratings. That was real. Karoline smiled warmly at Steve. You okay with one more surprise? He nodded cautiously. From behind the curtain stepped an older gentleman, military build, silver hair, sharp eyes, but with a warm and weathered face. Thomas Leavitt. Steve's mouth fell open. Wait a minute, that's him? That's your dad. Karoline nodded, tears already brimming. Thomas walked forward, slow but sure, and embraced Steve Harvey with both arms. It wasn't a handshake, it wasn't a pat on the back. It was the hug of a man who had once been broken, now whole again. I wanted to tell you thank you myself, Thomas said. You didn't just give me hope, you gave my daughter a reason to fight and this country a reason to believe again. Steve, visibly choked up, squeezed his eyes shut. Man, y'all trying to make me cry again on camera? President Trump, watching quietly, broke the silence. Now this is what they don't show on the news. Real Americans. Real love. Real healing. The cameras were already rolling. Steve turned to his audience and said, well, folks, today you're not just watching a talk show. You're witnessing a miracle. What happened that day wasn't just a talk show segment. That night, President Trump invited Karoline, Steve, and Thomas to join him during a special national address on unity and American values. Broadcast from the White House Rose Garden, millions of Americans tuned in to see something rarely witnessed in modern politics: a Republican president, a black television host, a military veteran, and a young press secretary, all standing together in solidarity. Trump stepped up to the microphone first. My fellow Americans, this is not a political message. This is a human one. In the last few weeks, this country has been reminded that the most powerful weapon we have is not missiles or machines. It's stories. It's the ability to move each other. He gestured toward Steve. This man didn't need a platform. He is the platform. And when Karoline reminded him of the life he changed without even knowing it, America listened. Karoline spoke next, her voice steady but passionate. My father, standing beside me today, was once in a dark place. I could have lost him. But because of one man's honesty, one man's message of faith, I didn't. And now I get to serve this country with my father watching me every step of the way. Steve followed, clearly nervous to be speaking at the White House but holding the moment with grace. I didn't set out to make waves, y'all. I was just doing what I've always done, trying to make somebody's day a little better. But what I learned through Karoline's letter, through her daddy's story, and through this crazy journey is that we never know the full reach of our words. You can be changing lives and not even know it. Then, unexpectedly, Thomas Leavitt took the mic. He cleared his throat, voice trembling. To every veteran out there struggling in silence, don't give up. To every dad who thinks he failed his kids, don't count yourself out. If God can give me a second chance, He can give you one, too. Silence swept the lawn. Then applause. Then standing ovation even from the press pool. In the weeks that followed, a national nonprofit called Letters of Legacy was launched by Karoline Leavitt and Steve Harvey together, with Thomas Leavitt serving as honorary chairman. Its mission? To help people write and deliver letters of gratitude to those who shaped their lives, with a special focus on veterans, educators, and mentors. Schools across the nation began including legacy letter days into their curriculum. Churches incorporated the practice into Sunday reflections. Celebrities, athletes, and even members of Congress shared their own letters, bridging divides not with arguments, but with appreciation. Karoline continued her work in the White House, more committed than ever, now known not just as the youngest press secretary in U.S. history, but as the one with the biggest heart. Steve Harvey went on to win a humanitarian award for his role in inspiring the movement, and he often said in interviews, that letter changed my life more than any paycheck ever did. And Thomas? He began speaking publicly to veterans groups, sharing his story of despair, redemption, and the unexpected power of a daughter's love. In a world divided by politics, one letter, written from a father to a daughter, reminded an entire nation of something far more powerful than partisanship: gratitude. Steve Harvey's tears weren't just from emotion. They were from awakening. And Karoline Leavitt? She didn't just speak truth from a podium. She helped revive a country's soul from a studio. Sometimes, the most powerful words are simply thank you.